Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with another Isaac Asimov short story. This one has the peculiar distinction of being his very last short story to make its initial appearance on the pages of fantasy and science fiction, in particular the October 1980 issue. So it's his last one there. Considering that he makes it into the 1990s before he's gone, that's a good many years not to appear on the pages of fantasy and science fiction. It may have something to do with perhaps fantasy and science fiction itself as a magazine. It may not have lasted a whole lot much longer. That being the case, the story here is called Death of a Boy, Isaac Asimov. Page 95. So, let's take a look at what is on page 95. By the way, he is still. It also has, as he's been doing all the time, his every monthly issue of Science, the Word I Invented. He has an interesting little section about robotics. Maybe I can talk about that a little bit. It's kind of neat to see something of his else in the magazine. So, as usual for fantasy and science fiction, there's no artwork unless it's on the cover, which the story is understandably not. So, there it is. There's a tiny squib at the top, and then there's the text of the story. The story continues on to the next page. And that's the end of it. I mean, it doesn't occupy the whole page. You got the ending of a couple other stories on that page. And that's all he wrote. So, what exactly is going on here? Well, let's read the blurb here, and then I'll look at it a little bit more in the other place. In which the good doctor proves that he always thinks big, even when he's just horsing around. Okay. Well, what does it say about that? And that story is also, by the way, gathered into his collection, The Winds of Change. So, not at all a rarity, and without any apparent difference again in the text, other than you lose the blurb. There's no artwork to lose this case. But you gain a nice little introduction here, where he talks about how this story came to be written and how it came to show up in, of all places, fantasy and science fiction. So, he says, every once in a while, George Skithers of Asimov's likes to publish short and outrageous stories, and every once in a while, I like to write one. So, I wrote Death of a Boy and sent it off to George, hardly able to stop laughing long enough to seal the envelope. You can imagine my indignation when George rejected it. Actually, it was good that he did. I don't want anyone to think that the appearance in my own magazine of any story I write is a foregone conclusion. George has strict orders to reject anything of mine he doesn't like. He accepts that situation, and so do I. Making a few cursory remarks under my breath, a little pun on cursory, okay, I sent the story on to Ed Furman, I'm the guy in charge of that, at the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, hereafter to be referred to as FNSF. I'm not sure why, because I don't think anything else appears from that publisher. Let's just look here. Mercury Press. Does anything else appear in Mercury Press? I don't think so. Oh no. There was one of those One Night of Song? And a Smile That Loses? I'll have to look those up. Alright. Fortunately, he managed to stop laughing long enough to write out a check, and it appeared in the October 1980 FNSF. Okay, well, let's take a look into it. So what exactly is going on? You have something called a FOI, F-O-I. Okay, And they were the highest social class on their planet, with the name which was pronounced as nearly as earthly throats could make the sounds. Ooh, it's got this nice long word. Sorty Street. Sorty Street. Is that like Slarty Bartfast? Hitchhiker Guide reference. And they were virtually immortal. Every foil, of course, came to voluntary death eventually, and this one had given up because of an ill-starred love affair, if you could call it a love affair, where 5 individuals, in order to reproduce, must indulge in a year-long mental contact. Apparently, he himself had not fit into the contact after several months of trying, and it had broken his heart, or hearts, since he had 5. Okay. All foys have 5 large hearts, and there was speculation that it was this that made them virtually immortal. Ahmad Briscoe, Earth's most renowned surgeon, wanted those hearts. It can't be just their number and size, Ray. It has to be something physiological and biochemical. I must have them. Wanting somebody's organs for scientific study. So, there's a choir led by somebody named Harold Gassenbaum, and that's a nice name. And then there was sort of, what's its name? Yeah, sort of back and straight. Well, at any rate, this is just a shaggy dog story leading to a rather bad pun. Give my big hearts to Maud, Ray. Dismember me for Harold's choir. Tell all the foys on Sortabakken Street that I will soon be there. Well, give my regards to Broadway. Okay, I think I just gave away the whole point of it. And sad to say, that really is all there was. Yeah, not one of his better stories. It ends in another. Rather, I don't know. It could be worse, but it's not the greatest pun. Well, what else do we have of him in this vacancy? There's a section here, 122. Ooh, it has a little diagram for once. Science by Isaac Asimov. I probably put that on all of this. The word I invented. Well, what this is, he's talking about robotics and how that word came along, and then he answers some questions pertaining to his thoughts on robotics and fiction and so forth. So the questions are answered. I'll just simply recite the questions and comment on them minimally as worth commenting on. 1. Dr. Asimov, how did you come to be such an expert in the field of robotics? I didn't. I just wrote stories. 2. I'm paraphrasing and summarizing very tightly his responses. 2. In that case, Dr. Asimov, how did you come to write so many robot stories, considering that you know nothing about the subject? Well, he started back when nobody knew anything about him. And when he started, with a couple of exceptions, Ian O'Bender's iRobot, and there was another one that's, I think he actually cites it here. Yeah, Lester Del Rey's Helen O'Loy. With those 2 lone exceptions, every single robot story ever written from the time that such stories were written, and in a way kind of before, like, you make a being some other way, like Frankenstein and his monster, that kind of thing. The created being, the robot, or Frankenstein's monster, or whatever, invariably at some point turns on its creator and kills the creator. There are things man was not meant to know. Or robotese is clank, clank, and So he wanted to get out of that. There are already those 2 stories as precedent, and he writes his own, which emerged as Strange Playfellow, but he wanted to call it Robbie, and everywhere but its originally released in one reprint, which I did show somewhere in this series. It always did appear under the title Robbie. Robbie the Robot, yeah, a nursemaid robot. Beginning story of iRobot, and its only short story enclosed that did not get its start in its publication on the pages of astounding science fiction. So, alright, that was a little more interesting. Number 3. Does that mean that you have the 3 laws of robotics in mind when you began writing your robot stories? Well, the 3 laws, well, like Topsy, it just growed. It was a gradual thing. It mentions that. But you say you invented the term robotics. Is that right? Yeah, I did. 5. I frequently hear your robots referred to as positronic robots. Why positronic? Now, I kind of like this answer here. When I first began writing science fiction stories, the positron had been discovered only 6 years before as a particle with all the properties of an electron except for an opposite charge. It was the first, and at that time still the only, bit of antimatter that had been discovered, and it carried a kind of science fictional flavor about it. Yeah. That meant that if I spoke of positronic robots rather than electronic robots, I would have something exotic and futuristic instead of something conventional. What's more, positrons are very evanescent particles, at least in our world. They don't survive more than a millionth of a second or so before they bump into one of the electrons with which our world is crowded, and then the two annihilate each other. I had a vision. Now this is kind of getting interesting because I wondered about this. Why positrons? I had a vision, therefore, of positronic pathways, along which positrons briefly flashed and disappeared. These pathways are analogous to the neurons of the animal nervous system, and the positrons themselves were analogous to the nerve impulse. The exact nature of the pathways were controlled by positronic potentials, and where certain potentials were set prohibitively high, then certain thoughts or deeds became virtually impossible. It was the balance of such potentials which resulted in the 3 laws. Okay, other than that, no. Alright, next question. Talking about the positronic energy reminds me, Dr. Asimov, to wonder where your robots got the energy to do their work. Where? The atomic power. Heat. In your earliest robot stories, you made no mention of computers, yet surely the positronic brain is actually a very complex, compact, and versatile computer. Why did you not say so? I haven't thought of it yet. I pictured something kind of humaniform, and somehow in being humaniform, maybe it might kind of think or even feel like something kind of human. I mean, you look at our story, for example, in the Bicentennial Man, where a robot, struggles to be human, and kind of the same thing in the character of Hari Seldon's lifelong companion, the robot Doris Benabili. So, number 9. Come to think of it, why are robots humaniform? Surely that is not the most efficient shape. And he has an answer for that. He had a good answer before, by the way. And that had to do with if you wanted to be able to put a machine to replace a man directly, you already have machines built to go with human beings, say a tractor, whatever. You have a humaniform robot, you just stick the humaniform robot where the human being would go, and off you go. Obviously, if you want a robotic tractor, you could just build the brain directly into the tractor. There's no need to, have all the steering and braking and other operating controls that a tractor would have, and then make a robot design that you could stick it where the man would be to work here where the human would be. Okay. 10. Well then, when do you think we will have robots like you describe, as intelligent and versatile and subject to the 3 laws? Well, how can one tell? Well, it's not something you live to see. We're getting awful close, though. It's kind of neat. So, and now there's emphasis on artificial intelligence. We may be getting close in other ways. Number 11. Since you mentioned the possibility of a malfunctioning robot, how safe are the 3 laws anyway? They seem to be ambiguous. How do you define a human being? What do you mean by harm? Well, and those ambiguities are a lot of his stories. Number 12. And thou art mindful of you, then you forecast the replacement of human beings by robots, while in the bicentennial man, you forecast the fusion of human beings and robots. Which do you think the more likely of the two? His first two words are very succinct. Perhaps neither. I think I'll leave it at that. So, but he did talk about something which might be a way to look ahead. We could then have a symbiotic arrangement, one in which the robot and the human being would be far greater together than either could possibly be separately. It was this I was aiming at in my Elija Baley novels, The Caves of Steel, from 1953, pictured a society in which human beings overbalanced the robot, The Naked Sun, one which the robots overbalanced the human beings, in particular Solaria. The projected third novel of the series, remember this is 1980, and he hasn't even done the Foundation's Edge, let alone the next one after that, which was The Robots at Dawn. The projected third novel of the series was to show the symbiotic balance, but though I tried, I lacked the ability to picture what was dimly in my mind. I failed when I first tried in 1958, and I never quite felt I was up to it since. What a pity I didn't get to it when I was still in my 20s and had not yet grown wise enough to know there were things I lacked the ability to do. That's an interesting take on that. Yes, he had it. 1958 started actually a couple of stories that never happened. One was The Bounds of Eternity, I believe was its name, and it was going to be basically set probably on Aurora or Sirius, take your pick. The main planet of the 50 spacer worlds. Remember, Elija Baley and robot Daniel Olival are in the spacer world context, and not the heading toward Galactic Empire and then Foundation universe, which the two hadn't yet been brought together at this point. So it belonged in that context. But what was exactly going to be going on, and how was he going to picture a society that robots and humans kind of worked fairly nicely together, or comfortably together at least? You know, he hadn't really quite come up to that, and he really couldn't do that in 1958. Probably whatever he could think of wasn't very good. So, that was abandoned. Another story he abandoned about that time, I don't know why, was about the snows of Pluto, I believe. The idea was Pluto's really cold, snowy place. And some adventure would take place with our good buddy Lucky Starr. So that may have just been abandoned because at that point, fact was more interesting for him to write than fiction. And so his fiction, as we might recall, even these stories, there's a while there, they just kind of trail off. And a couple of years there, nothing at all appears other than one very old story finally seeing print. So, well, thanks for listening.